I also have that power now too, so it started, and so this is the Augur meeting, and today I thought we could talk a little bit about, and I'll put the notes for the Augur meeting into the chat that we have. Once I find my calendar again. Sorry. Here are the notes for the Augur meeting. And one of the things we talked about for the working groups is somebody would share their screen. So the thing that we're talking about is actually visible to people in the video that gets recorded. And so, agenda-wise, let's talk about. What's I think contributors, sort of contributor counting. Gabe, you've been doing some work on that recently.
Yeah, maybe more centered around affiliations.
Yes, contributor affiliation technology. And we also have pull request commits as a new piece of technology. And we also have our Docker build, which I'll just say Docker build update, since we have updated the Docker build lately. And then maybe a little bit of notebooks to mine the depths of Augur. I imagine we'll be releasing some of those in the next few months. And then maybe documentation updates and next release.
Yeah, I was going to ask to talk about that as well.
All right, so Gabe, I will let you talk a little bit about contributor affiliation technology. Now, I don't know if there's a screen share or that I should do. Should I? Do you want to share? Do you want me to share code? Do you want me to share?
Maybe just here. Why don't I share my screen?
All right, I will cease to share. If I can find that button, I've stopped sharing.
All right. Okay. So one of our data collection tools called Facade has the ability to take into account the canonical emails of contributors. So lots of times people will commit to a repository under a bunch of different emails, and some of them have the domain of a company. And so we have this affiliation data that maps domains to company names, like AT&T here, for example.
So it's like the top 500 global companies and then some change.
Yeah. So, and then people on their database instance have the ability to insert their own domains if they like I've done down here. Just depending on which email domains they're specifically looking for. And so we're adding a new ability to our facade data collection worker, which is our commit counting worker, to take into account the contributors and all their alias emails, and figure out which one was most recently used that has a company domain attributed to it. And we're using that to associate a company to the commits to a repository. So community managers will be able to see what outside companies they have contributing to their projects. And that's all based on the canonical email. So the hope is to be able to detect when someone changes companies, and just have a full history of that. Um, since we're going off the canonical email and which email was last used. So that's been pretty interesting. It's a work in progress right now. We're testing everything for it to make sure it's all working properly. But we thought that would be of big interest for community managers looking to see where their contributions are coming from.
Yeah.
And are there any specific questions on that or anything anyone wanted me to go deeper on?
So that would show up like in the, if I went to the dashboard sometimes, if there aren't any company affiliations, that would start showing up on the dashboard as companies contributing to a project, for example, at some point.
Yeah, yep. That would definitely be a visualization we'd want to add.
All right. I need to step away for just a sec. I've got a little bit of a cold. I need to be right back.
All right. Um, I'll go on. If there's no questions on how this affiliation mapping is done, um, I can talk a little bit about the pull request commits now.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
All
I'm
right.
here.
Same here.
Quick question on the
Yeah.
mapping.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have an answer for this, but just out of curiosity, how are you handling like Google employees in this particular scenario? Because Google's very active in open source and in
I see. And they would probably have a Gmail account. So I guess that's why you're asking, like
yeah,
are we Gmail type email? So
yeah. Do you have a workaround for that or?
um so I kind of view this contributor affiliations table as, so we have these like 500 companies as a good basis to find these domains and companies. But if a company was, or if a community manager with their own database instance was particularly interested in seeing uh, what Google employees are contributing to their project, they have the ability to come in here and add the gmail.com domain extension. The reason we don't have that in as a default is because lots of people who are not Google employees have that domain too, obviously. So it would kind of, it's a little hard to tell with a case like Google, who are employees. And unfortunately, we're a little limited by just being able to determine their company affiliation just based off their email. But it's a user by user basis. So if they wanted to see those Gmail affiliations, and they could definitely add that into this table here, and then they will get mapped.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm back.
So, all right. So I'll talk a little bit about the pull request commits now. So This was originally an extension to our pull request data collection worker, but after talking about some design choices, I think we're going to pull it out into its own worker, because I think we're going to start following a model of one data model per worker or something close to that, because it's easier for people running these workers and doing the data collection to be able to know how many workers they want to allocate for what specific task. And it kind of just makes everything a little more precise. So we're probably going to move this out into its own worker. But basically what this is an entirely new table to our schema, from the past, like, I think it was like 2 weeks ago or something, we added it.
Maybe a little bit longer, maybe, but yeah.
And so the point of adding it and collecting this data was because people expressed interest in wanting to see try to gauge the size of a pull request and see how that may affect whether or not it gets merged or closed.
It also provides commit SHAs for commits that never make it into master. So if something's never merged, the commit doesn't show up in our commit log.
Right. So the best, or what one way someone might want to gauge size is by looking at the lines of code count. But the only way we can get the lines of code count is through our facade commit counting worker, which can only count the commits to master. So like Sean was saying, this for pull request commits that are committed and merged into master, we'll be able to get lines of code data for that. But for commits that are not, or for pull requests that are rejected, people still want to gauge the size for that too. So what this table allows us to do is be able to get the number of commits included in every pull request, regardless of if it's merged into master or not. And it's a relatively straightforward design. You would just be able to count the distinct commit SHAs within each pull request. And that can be used for some interesting information. Were there any particular questions on that?
No, I think that's a really good addition, and I don't think we really recognize the sort of the gap in the number of pull requests that aren't committed, but there's still work there, and it's interesting to see if the extent to which pull request size influences its acceptance.
Yeah.
So that's a question that we can answer that I don't think any of the other tools can answer right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great insight to see how that might play into whether or not it gets merged, and how a repository typically does pull requests. So if there's no more questions on that, we can move to the next thing, which is Carter's Docker build update. So I can stop sharing my screen if you want to share something, Carter.
I'm trying to think about what exactly I would need to share, but basically, I mean, I've just been working more on making sure the Docker build is stable. It's been pretty stable for a while now. Like it generally just works TM. Really, the main thing I've been focusing on with Docker is, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, is the documentation stuff. So the actual usage guidelines, how the system is architected, like how you're expected to use it, how to configure it to work properly, using the different options that we provide. That's been kind of my main focus for the past couple days, just being able to, since it's in such a working state, it's in such a, relatively compared to where it was, stable state. I've been working a lot on the documentation. One thing I do want to do going forward, and I don't think I'll be able to do this before the next release, just because we're trying to get the release out the door, is adding a separate, adding the value worker in some form to the Docker build, because right now the Docker build requires, or the value worker requires Go, an installation of Go to work. And I just haven't had the time to get that working in the Docker containers, since Docker containers are, they're highly structured and they're supposed to be as small as possible. And just like the way that you build them is very specific, and especially trying to combine a Python application with a Go application might be kind of tricky. So there's a couple of avenues that we have for exploring that. One of which being using a completely separate container to install Go in, to make it a completely optional thing. One of them would be finding a way to install it alongside in the same container as Augur. So that's something that I've been looking to do here pretty soon. And then and then I'm also in the middle of refreshing all of the test data. So Augur uses, actually I don't know if this was ready during the last call, but Augur now officially provides a test data environment that can be used by any developer to reproduce our test environment on their machine. So we don't have to give them access to the test database. They don't have to try to build ours from scratch. They can just use the Docker image. And then it also has the added benefit of allowing them to use we now use the same Docker image in our Travis builds. Before, what we were doing is pointing to a specific database that we had up on one of our servers, and that would run the tests. But since we were using sensitive credentials, we were using database credentials, only pull requests that came from within Augur, within the main repository, had access to those sensitive build credentials. So anybody who was submitting a pull request from outside the organization, like from a fork, would not have access to the build results. And so what was happening is a couple times, minor things would get changed that we wouldn't think would break the build. And then we would merge it, and all of a sudden the build would be breaking. It'd be like, oh, it would have been really nice to be able to catch that before we merged it in. It's what the tests are there for. So now using this Docker container, since it's not actually a database, every pull request that comes in from outside the repository has access to the Docker container, and they can now use the testing environment within the Docker build, within Travis. So all pull requests now have access to the build environment. And so we can see them all pass. So we never have to worry about like, oh, your pull request is coming from outside the repository. I just have to trust you that the tests will pass. We don't have to worry about that anymore, which has been really nice. I know I just talked for a while. Does anybody have any questions? Want me to go back to anything?
So basically updated tests, hardening the environment.
Yeah.
Including the value worker.
That will be upcoming. That's not going to be in the most current release, just because there's other things that I need to be focusing on for that to get that out the door. And then also just the documentation stuff, but that kind of falls in with the 0.5 down there.
Yep.
Do you guys have a current video showing how to deploy via Docker?
No, simply because the documentation has not been finalized to the point where I am comfortable doing that. I actually was working with a Google Summer of Code student yesterday. She helped me identify some stuff that was missing from the documentation and stuff that was wrong. Not big stuff, just like I forgot to include this minor thing you have to do to get it configured. So as soon as that's all done, I'm going to put together a video showing how to do each of the different types of deployment with Docker, going through the documentation step by step. So you can follow along. Here's what it says. Here's what that means you should do. And then you can watch me do it and listen to me explain it as I go through the documentation.
Where would you post that video? Because I have access to the CHAOSS YouTube channel, and I could post there.
That would actually be great. I could just record it locally and then,
I,
edit it
I,
a little bit just to make sure it's coherent, and then I could send it to you.
I think I have the ability to do that too.
Do you? Okay. If
I'm
you
not
do that,
positive. I'm not
put it.
positive. Well, I don't need to share my screen for this.
Let me see what you look at for YouTube.
Yeah. Nothing.
But yeah, I know that that's definitely something that people would really, really want is the
Okay.
Docker stuff. So as soon as the documentation is ready, probably after it's been released, I'll throw together that video and we'll put it up somewhere.
Yeah, and I do not have the ability to upload, but I would like the ability to upload. So I can just put these videos up as we develop them.
We could also do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna make Shauna a person who shares the ability to do that.
Oh, got it. And then this way, it will allow us to do. We'll probably do the same thing with a regular source code installation, like installing from source for Augur. There'll probably be one for setting up a database as well. Outside of the installation and deploying with Docker, I don't think we would need to do any other videos for the time being, just because, we could, but those are the ones I think would be most applicable. But yeah. That's about all I've got for the Docker stuff, unless there's anything else you wanted me to talk about, Sean.
No, I think getting that video up there is super, and getting the documentation finished for the release. These are our top priorities right now. So, and Carter and a lot of the team are doing a bunch of work on that, and Gabe's obviously put together a lot of the contributor affiliation and pull request commit technology that is adding things that people are actively asking for. So we're meeting the needs of people who want to use Augur, and I think that's great. The last topic on our agenda is some of the work that we've been doing using Jupyter notebooks to mine the depths of Augur. And I don't know if there are examples that we have generalized that we can use. I think all the examples we have are actually for specific groups of people and focus on their specific repositories. So
I have a template that does Rails.
All right, let's show that.
Okay.
Because I think this is one of the things about Augur is I haven't done a detailed analysis, but my back of the envelope estimate is around 10% of the available insight that you can get from the data we collect is visible in any dashboard that we provide. So we started to use Jupyter notebooks to give people access to or answers to the questions that they have specifically. And oftentimes those questions are not questions that are Augur metric or CHAOSS metric questions, like I want to see the number of commits. They are, I want to see the number of commits over this time period for these repositories in a way that helps me understand trajectory or flow. So Gabe, I don't know if you want to share your screen for that,
yeah, I'm currently pulling up the notebook and running through the whole thing, but it looks like it just finished. So yeah, I'll share my screen.
And I keep muting myself when I have to blow my nose.
And I think we may have shown a little bit of this on a previous call. I could be wrong, but
we may have.
The visualizations in this notebook are centered around pull request data and drawing some insights from what we can provide related to pull requests. So this one here, for example, is using that new pull request commits table that I was describing earlier. And so for your repository, you can see how over time the number of commits per pull request, the average number of commits per pull request for your merged and rejected pull requests. So this and most of these we have going over time by a yearly or monthly basis, because people generally like to see how these things develop as their project matures.
This is really consistent with some of the research that James Howison has done on um, smaller amounts of work being more quickly accepted and taken on by developers and then merged into projects. Because what this clearly shows is pull requests with more commits are merged less often.
Yeah, yeah, and very consistently over each year. So that's a cool way to gauge how the size impacts whether or not it gets merged. Here's another one, which is surprisingly stable over the maturity of the project. So this is showing the mean number of comments on each pull request, which in a way is related to the above. So how much activity these pull requests are getting, and how that may correlate to their merged status. So for this repository, it's fairly consistent.
There are more comments on pull requests that are not merged.
Yeah, but Rails is already their project. So generally, I feel like most repositories would see an increase over time as they gain more popularity, and interact more with the community, which we're seeing a little bit of that.
Yeah, I have a paper from like 7 years ago that pretty clearly shows that it's the rejected pull requests that are often commented on more.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this is also consistent with some research.
And so this one right here is just a volume metric, just showing how many pull requests are actually opened. And of those, if you want to see the ratio of how many are merged, how many are rejected, this visualization allows you to do that. And we also have a separate bar showing the slowest 20%, which might give some insight on for pull requests that a repository is letting sit there for longer. This might let you see maybe that's because they don't want to merge it and they're trying to be nice, or maybe they're just trying to sort a lot of things out so that they can merge it. So for Rails here, at least in these previous years, the majority of the slowest 20% were merged and accepted, which I feel like is different from the norm, probably.
Certainly different than the projects we've looked at inside of CHAOSS.
Yeah, because usually if someone lets a pull request hang on for a long time, maybe they're just trying to be nice and not ruin the contributors'
day.
Yeah. So this is cool to see those kinds of ratios, and just merged and not merged overall. This project has more merged than not, which is good to see. And this one gets at the efficiency of the responses of the maintainers of the repository. So it's showing the mean days for the first and last response on a pull request. So generally you want to see a first response time very close to the opening of a pull request. And something's going on here, maybe a couple outliers that are drawing this average. The 7.2 day wait time for a mean first response really isn't a good value you want to see for that.
There's a lot of research that says 24 hours is the window for response times.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if
So
it's not within 24 hours, then the likelihood of that individual continuing to contribute is very poor.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah, I can
Rails
see that.
project is very large. I think they take a lot of pull requests every year, so it may be that there's a change in leadership in that project, or a change in who the person attending or nurturing that community is.
Yeah, maybe so. And it's also important to note that the y-axis here is the year that the pull request was closed. So while the mean days to close for not merged pull requests is insanely large here in 2019, that may be because they're doing a lot of uh, cleaning of their pull requests and getting to ones that they let sit there for too long, which is probably why this average is skewed here.
Yeah, you're right. They could have been. They could have done a lot of tidying up that year.
Yeah, depending on the user, some community managers may prefer for the y-axis to be year created. Um, but like I said, it just depends on perspective and what they're trying to see, because they do show very different things. And so,
How come you're looking at the mean and not the median on these? Because I would assume this data is really right skewed.
yes, yeah, and that's a good point. Median would be maybe a more fitting perspective for a metric like this, where the average is obviously being skewed.
Yeah, I think you could just copy what we have in the cell that generates this and change the word mean to median in the calculation and have that right away.
Yeah, yep. So, yeah, that's probably something I would add as a parameter here. All these visualizations I've made into as modular as possible functions so that we can easily reproduce these for anyone who might be interested in these metrics and visualizations. And so having settings like that in like the closed year, this could easily be changed to the created year, and including one for median, I think is a great idea too. Because in this case specifically, like you said, I think it would be more representative. And moving on, um, this one is showing the average days between responses for these separate groups of pull requests, merged status, and the slowest 20% of the pull requests. And so this also gets at gauging how active the maintainers are and how quick they are to respond to people and how good they are at keeping up with those kinds of things. And this may be another case where the median may be more representative if they're just letting one or two pull requests sit for a very long time. That's probably why we're seeing some of these skewed. And these are grouped by month. So if they close a pull request this month that they'd let sit since 2012, that may be why we're seeing things like this. And so here's another response time one. And the interesting thing about this one is there's a point for every pull request. So you can kind of see like in previous ones where it's using means and things of that sort. This actually lets you see how many points may be on the higher end of the y-axis that may be skewing that. And the x-axis is the date closed. And so, like we had said earlier, maybe they were doing a lot of cleaning at this time, which looks like is the case.
It's the end of the
It's like
year.
the end
They're
of the year,
tidying up. Yeah.
they closed a whole lot of pull requests that had been sitting around for a while, which is really interesting to see how this lines up with the new year. They're clearly trying to get that done in time.
It's interesting that some of them also got merged. It looks like at that time, even
Yeah.
though they had been.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like some of them didn't get responded to for like a third of a year, and then just, hey, we're gonna merge your PR.
Yeah,
That
looks
is
That's actually kind of
interesting.
interesting. That's pretty cool.
Maybe on some that were sitting there, they had requested changes and the contributor hadn't got back in a long time. They're like, hey, you don't get these changes in, then we're going to have to reject it. Maybe something like that. But yeah, that is interesting to see. Okay, and this one lets us see
types of events on pull requests.
Yeah, some different pull request event types.
Might want to zoom out just a little bit.
Yeah, and in general, people are probably most interested in things like comment. And it's interesting, some repositories have merged counts that are greater than one, and that kind of gets into like the inner culture of how some repositories do pull requests generally. And someone that we created this visualization for was saying something like that, how it turns out that there is more than one merged count on a specific pull request. Do you remember, Sean, what event that occurs?
Where it's merged more than once?
Yeah. I remember someone saying that was like part of how they did pull requests.
Yeah, there's and these are just against master, right?
No, these are all.
Okay, so yeah, there's a process then on that project where they merge it from the fork that someone was working on into a dev branch and then a test branch, and then they do a final merge into master when it's accepted.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so maybe this can let you get
yeah, so a pull request will be merged many times.
Yeah, so this is just a closer look at some of those specific events. And this is the last one. And this gets at the average days to close. But it's in the form of a heat map, which kind of lets you see some more gradient, and it can be easier to see visually what's going on and what times of year are more hectic for these repositories. So end of the year here, like we were seeing earlier.
Yeah, it's clearly the end of 2019 that Rails decided to really do some cleanup on aged pull requests.
Yeah. So these visualizations are interesting because you can see those kinds of things and how the repository develops over time. Were there any specific questions on any of those?
Not for me.
If not, we had documentation updates in the agenda.
Yeah, Carter, I don't know if you have a branch of the documentation that is closer to finished. If I know Carolyn was doing a lot of work, I don't know if she's pushed it yet.
Yeah, I mean, the Docathon branch is essentially, aside from minor changes in Carolyn's CLI documentation, is essentially complete in its first iteration.
Let's show
a link to it.
Why don't you show your screen?
I'll share my screen. Yeah. Um, all right, can everybody see my window okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is Augur's new documentation. Um, it doesn't look super pretty right now. We probably I want to, be nice to add some cool visualizations and format it a little bit, but that's
It
neither here
it
nor there.
it looks
Um,
exactly like most of the readthedocs.io
yeah,
documentation that I get referred to. Um, so it's pretty. I mean, what's good about it is it's a
it's
format and a look that people are accustomed to.
yeah, and I just really like the theme as well. I just think it looks really nice and it's very clean and professional. But anyways,
Yeah, wait,
for the
Carter, could
important
you
stuff.
share that link in the?
Oh
Oh
yeah,
yes, yes, yes. Sorry, did not do that. I even copied it so that I could. Let me pull up. I pull up the chat. Am I
yeah. When you're
just?
sharing, it's a little tricky because it hides it. There's a toolbar
It's
that's
under more. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I don't want to message just Gabe. I want it to go to everybody. There we go. Um, so this is the link that I'm at right now. And so this is in the Docathon branch, doc-a-thon, because we named it that because I was like, oh, I have to write a whole bunch of documentation in a very short amount of time. I'll have a Docathon. So this is just a brief primer on the project and our goals. Like this section says, this is basically kind of what we do. This could probably stand to be updated because this has been here for a very long time. Not updated as in changed, just maybe reworked a little bit, so we can do that later. Some links to the people who directly work on Augur a lot. The main focus of the documentation for this upcoming release has been really three primary areas, and the first being the most important, which is the getting started. So this was my attempt to rework the getting started with Augur section to go from a kind of too overwhelming and not directed enough to a more streamlined start here, go to the next page, follow all of these steps, go to the next page, follow all of these steps. And by the end, you should have a hopefully somewhat cursory understanding of how Augur works, how to configure it to collect the data that you want. And then you'll be pointed to the command line documentation with some specific guides on how to get started. And then from there, people would go, okay, I've got a database, I've got Augur installed, I've got some repositories in my database, let's get collecting data. That's kind of the main focus of this getting started section. And then I'll briefly talk about the other two, and then I'll briefly peruse them, just so you can see what's in there. And then the Docker section is pretty self-explanatory. It's all about deploying with Docker. The formatting's weird because the introduction's at the bottom. I gotta figure out how to do that so that it's weird to have the introduction be the last part of it. But essentially, all the stuff about doing with Docker, how to install it, how to use it, how to configure it, and then the development guide right now is just basically how do you configure stuff for development, do you install stuff locally for development, what are the different make commands that Augur offers that primarily are for developers. Well, all the make commands are really for developers besides the make install. And then the documentation, which is just how to build and write documentation. Beyond these three main sections right now, we haven't really spent a whole lot of time, primarily because these are the ones that enable people to get going with Augur the fastest and were the ones that needed the most attention. Things like deploying on a server, the Python API, like the Python code API, not the actual REST API, the Python API, the schema stuff, we still have in development, but has not been as major of a focus since most people coming to the documentation are probably going to be looking for how do you get started working with Augur and installing stuff. There also will be a lot more in the development guide, how to add a metric, how to add a visualization, how do the workers work, how does our testing work, all of that sort of stuff. But this is kind of what we identified as the minimum viable documentation, if you will, for the upcoming release. I know we're at 5 minutes till the top of the hour, but does anybody want me to jump into any of these sections and just kind of walk through them pretty quickly?
Well, how mature is the Docker documentation, or are there
Uh,
some?
it's what do you mean by mature? It's
Well, I
all
mean, I think it's probably the way that most people would like to get started because it's the easiest way to get started.
uh, I mean, it's mature. I'm gonna say it's not mature because
Okay.
I've written one iteration of it and one person has tested it.
All right.
So and
So,
already a number of issues have come to light. So and really, in order for this stuff to be ready for release, the best thing would just to have people try it and write down things that are wrong and then compile that list and send it to me so I can fix it.
all right.
It's pretty hard for me to do that myself because I know all of the
Yep.
weird stuff because I built it.
Yep. Yep.
So that's it. I would even say the same thing for the getting started and development guide. Really, none of it's mature because it's all really the first draft, other than a couple of small changes I made, and nobody's really tested it. So
All right. So
you
who can
know,
we have test it?
anybody and everybody.
We
It
should assign
it just
someone.
needs to be tested. I mean, ideally, it would be more than one person.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Um, uh, I'm gonna give a couple people on the team that maybe we should ask to test it.
Okay. Um, but I mean, yeah, that's really the most. I got to do the config file reference as well. I've actually kind of been thinking about if how I want to do this, slash if I want it to go in this section, because having a whole config file reference might be a little overwhelming to having it getting started.
Yeah.
Um, so that might be better served under development guide and just having people going, don't touch the defaults unless you need to.
I think under getting
Especially,
started, maybe it deserves a section on because really what the configuration, the things that people would edit after they install Augur in the configuration are frequencies of collection and
well,
how many workers are running for
we already
particular
have an
worker.
entire page dedicated to that. That's what this collecting data page is all about, configuring the workers and the configuration options for specific workers so that you can get it exactly how you need it to. Same thing, it's got the housekeeper as well. So that already has its own dedicated section because you're right, that is what most people will probably change. The
Um,
configuration file references for like the server, the database block. It's really maybe the front end block. Like
mhm.
it's not a whole lot of people aren't really going to change this probably unless they have a deep need to. So it's probably not super so well served in the config file reference.
I think
Um,
the development
that's
guide is also a good place, like you said.
yeah. This is just what I think. Gabe and I, you were the ones that workshopped out this structure.
Yeah, yeah.
I would be okay with moving it to development guide, but we can maybe once I write it, it would be better. It would be easier to make a decision.
Yeah, I think the configuration file belongs in the getting started section simply because anybody who uses Augur needs to understand it. It's not just a developer thing. It's affects how Augur operates.
Right. But the stuff in this section would be it would be every I wouldn't want to repeat anything from the collecting data. So most of the time we probably would want people to keep the defaults for this. And because the config gets generated for them based on the questions they answer
Mm,
during the installation process, it might be more of like it's almost like if you have the reference file in here, people will feel the need to edit it because they all of a sudden have this information, and
right.
we might want to deter them from doing that right away until they really know what they're doing, or even if they need to edit it.
Okay.
But that's again, we can discuss that, or we can. I could go either way on it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think if I think probably right now that I've noticed the defaults for the config file are to not have the workers turned on. So I
Yeah.
think if we're not going to explain it, the default should be for the workers to be turned on.
Well, it does get explained. It's right here.
Okay, all right, I
Yeah,
see.
it's all of the worker explanation is in collecting data. How to configure it, how to turn it on, the ports, the worker specific options, the housekeeper blocks, all of it. It's all in here.
So if
So
so if I
at
was
least
an
all that I could think.
if I was an Augur user, I would expect the workers to all be turned on by default. Like I wouldn't expect that I would have to turn them on, because otherwise I won't have any data.
I guess to me, I would expect them to be turned off because I want to be specific about the data that I collect. But that's just me. It's the easiest change in the world. So
Yeah,
um,
I don't know. Matt dropped off the call, but I my hunch is that people will be like, "What is Augur?" When if they just download it and install it, and it doesn't bring them any data when they bring up the dashboard, they'll be like, what am I getting? I don't understand this. Why is there no data? Um,
I would agree with that, Sean.
so I mean, obviously, I know there are some that we cannot turn on, but those are the ones that also um, we don't have any data on the dashboard for, like the value worker.
yeah, I guess my thinking is that if you turn it on, people don't know. If you just turn it on and the data's just there, like the
Well,
draw.
the data won't just be there. So we need to make an upfront statement that when you run Augur, it's going to go get data, and it might take a few days, depending on how many repositories you have.
Yeah, I guess I just don't want people to be running stuff without understanding what they're running, because that's the quickest way for them to go. I don't explain this; it's broken. You guys wrote bad software. But
Um, so like,
that's the pessimist in me. We can switch it. We can set the switch to on. I have no problem with that. That's just been my approach for now, and I don't think we've ever talked about it. So I can I can make that change later today and have it in dev by 12:30.
yeah, I think maybe a brief section at the top of the first page of the documentation that's just like what happens when you install Augur. Um, you're gonna get a dashboard of empty data, and it's going to start collecting. So you need to let it run for a few days before you have data.
Right.
um, and the commit data is going to come first because that's the fastest, and then the pull request, the issue data, all of that will be a function of
How many workers you have and how many repos you have.
bingo.
Yeah. It would be really nice to have some sort of progress indicator on the front end, but that's I think outside the scope of what we're trying to do right now. So
That's
we
I
can
think
add that to the
that
backlog.
should maybe go on the dashboard that should maybe go into the next release when we plan that out next week.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I think
I
since
know
we're at
we're
2 minutes
yeah.
over, I think I will say thank you everyone for sharing all of the work that's been done on Augur. I think this is a really great presentation and summary of some of the things that we've done most recently. And when we post this to the YouTube channel, which I think Kevin will get this recording in the cloud or something. Um, I will send out a little note to the list and say there's a lot of cool stuff here.
Awesome. Sounds
Thank,
good.
thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
And Carter or Gabe, I'll open up my Zoom channel to chat about the other stuff we were going to talk about.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.